Ghostly tales, yet mirrors of human life. Hey, everyone! Welcome to Encountering Chinese. Ghostly Tales from Zhai. Today, I'm going to tell you a story called Huang Ying. In the Shuntian prefecture, there was a man named Zhai. His family had a generations-long love for chrysanthemums, and this passion was particularly strong in Zhai's generation. Whenever he heard of a good variety of chrysanthemums in the market, he would insist on buying them, even if it meant traveling 1,000 miles. One day, a guest from Jinling stayed at his house. The person claimed that his cousin's home had one or two varieties of chrysanthemums not found in the north. Excited, Zhai immediately packed his bags and went to Jinling with the guest. The guest was very helpful, inquiring about shops selling chrysanthemums from various sources. This effort led him to find 2 chrysanthemum seedlings for Zhai. Grateful for the precious chrysanthemum seedlings, Zhai carefully concealed them and headed back home. While on the way, Zhai encountered a young man. The young man was riding a donkey, following behind an oil paper umbrella cart, exuding a carefree demeanor. As Zhai approached, he struck up a conversation with the young man, who introduced himself as Tao. Tao spoke eloquently and had a refined manner of speaking. Tao asked Zhai where he came from, and Zhai truthfully revealed his origin. As they walked and talked, the conversation turned to chrysanthemums. Tao remarked, "There are no bad varieties of chrysanthemums, the key lies in how the cultivator nurtures and waters them." Intrigued, Zhai discussed chrysanthemum cultivation methods with Tao. Finding a common interest, Zhai asked Tao, "Where are you headed?" Tao replied, "My sister and I are tired of life in Jinling, so we plan to move to the northern region around the rivers." Delighted, Zhai said, "Although my home is humble, there are a few rooms where you can stay. If you don't mind the simple and small dwelling, there's no need to bother finding another house." Having heard this, Tao walked to the front of the carriage to discuss it with his sister. The person inside the carriage pushed aside the curtain to speak, and Zhai stole a glance, discovering that it was a stunning beauty in her 20s. She looked at Tao and said, "I don't mind the small house, I just hope the courtyard is a bit larger." Zhai agreed to her request, and so the siblings followed him back home. To the south of Zhai's house, there was an abandoned flower garden with 3 or 4 small houses nearby. Tao and his sister liked it, so they decided to live there. Every day, they would come to the northern courtyard and help Zhai cultivate chrysanthemums. Whenever they saw withered chrysanthemums, they would pull them out by the roots and replant new ones, and the newly planted chrysanthemums all thrived. However, it seemed that Tao's family was quite impoverished, as they ate with the Ma family every day, and it appeared that the Tao family never cooked for themselves. Zhai's wife Lu also had a great fondness for Tao's sister. she would frequently provide the Tao siblings with some grains. Later, the Ma family learned that Tao's sister's nickname was Huang. Huang was skilled at engaging in conversations with others and often visited Lu's house to do needlework together. One day, Tao said to Ma Zicai, "I can see that your family is not very wealthy. My sister and I eat at your house every day, and continuing like this will burden you. How can we allow that? I think I can make a living by selling chrysanthemums." Ma Zicai, always straightforward, looked down upon him after hearing Tao's words. Ma Zicai said, "I always thought you were a refined and elegant person, someone who could be content with poverty. Today, you actually say such words. Turning the place where chrysanthemums are grown into a market is an insult to chrysanthemums." Tao smiled and said, "Self-reliance is not a vulgar act, and making a living by selling flowers cannot be considered common either. While one should not resort to base conduct for wealth, there's no need to embrace poverty either." Ma Zicai remained silent after hearing this, and Tao had to leave. From then on, Tao would pick up and take away any discarded chrysanthemum branches and inferior varieties that Ma Zicai abandoned. He would plant them in the neglected flower garden. Since that day, Tao's family no longer ate at Ma's house, only occasionally accepting invitations from Ma Zicai. Soon, when the season for chrysanthemum blossoms arrived, the area around Tao's house became as lively as a market. Ma Zicai was curious and went to investigate. He found that people who came to buy flowers, whether by cart or on their shoulders, left fully loaded. Surprisingly, the chrysanthemums they bought were all unique varieties that Ma Zicai had never seen before. Ma Zicai began to despise Tao for his greediness and considered cutting ties with him. However, he also resented Tao for hoarding excellent chrysanthemum varieties. Ma Zicai decided to confront Tao about it and went to knock on Tao's door, intending to reprimand him face to face. Unexpectedly, when Tao came out, he warmly took Ma Zicai's hand and walked him into the flower garden. To Ma Zicai's surprise, the once abandoned courtyard, about half an acre in size, was now fully covered with rows of chrysanthemums. Almost every inch of available land was utilized, leaving only a few small houses. Tao had even used branches from other chrysanthemums to fill the spots where the chrysanthemums were removed. The chrysanthemums waiting to bloom in the flower beds were especially beautiful. Upon close inspection, Ma Zicai realized that these chrysanthemums were the ones he had previously pulled out and discarded. Tao went inside to fetch wine and food, setting up a feast near the chrysanthemum beds. He said to Ma Zicai, "Due to poverty, I couldn't adhere to a lofty moral conduct. Fortunately, now I can earn some money every day, enough to have a hearty drink with you here." After a short while, someone inside called, "Saburo," and Tao responded, going back into the house. Soon, he brought out delicious dishes. Ma Zicai noticed that the food was expertly prepared and took the opportunity to ask Tao, "Why hasn't your sister married yet?" Tao replied. The time has not come. Ma Zicai asked. When will that be? Tao said. In 43 months. Ma Zicai asked again, what does that mean? Tao just smiled, without giving a direct answer. The two of them drank heartily and enjoyed themselves until Ma Zicai left late at night. Another night passed, and Ma Zicai returned to Tao's home. To his astonishment, the chrysanthemum seedlings that were planted yesterday had already grown over a foot tall. Amazed, he earnestly requested Tao to teach him the technique of cultivating chrysanthemums. Tao said, this technique cannot be easily passed down, especially since you don't make a living from it. What use would there be for you to learn it? A few days later, the front of Tao's house gradually quieted down. Tao then bundled the chrysanthemums in reed mats, loaded them onto several carts, and left home. After a year, almost half of the spring season had passed when Tao returned with exotic flowers from the south. He opened a flower shop in the city and sold out the flowers he brought within just 10 days. He returned home to grow chrysanthemums. However, the people who bought flowers from Tao's house the previous year found that the chrysanthemums they grew from the roots left behind had turned into inferior varieties this year. Helplessly, they had to return to Tao's house to buy chrysanthemums. From then on, Tao's family became wealthier day by day. A year later, they built additional rooms, and 2 years later, they even constructed a large house. Tao's family made decisions about their house without consulting Ma Zicai. Gradually, houses were built where the chrysanthemums were originally planted in the abandoned garden. Tao and his sister also bought a piece of land outside the walls, surrounded it with a large wall, and planted chrysanthemums inside. In the autumn, Tao sold the chrysanthemums he grew outside again. The following spring passed, but he did not return. Later, Ma Zicai's wife passed away, and he considered marrying Huang. He secretly sent someone to inquire about Huang Ying's intentions. Huang heard about it, smiled, seeming to agree, but said they would discuss it when Tao returned. More than a year passed, but Tao had not returned. Huang urged her servants to continue growing chrysanthemums at home, just like when Tao was there. After the chrysanthemums were harvested, Huang discussed with flower merchants and bought 20 acres of fertile land outside the village, further expanding Tao family's residence. One day, a visitor from Dongyue arrived, bringing a letter written by Tao. Ma Zicai opened it and found that Tao had instructed his sister to marry Ma Zicai. Ma Zicai checked the date on the letter and realized that it was sent on the day his wife passed away. Recalling the time they drank in the garden, it was exactly 43 months ago today. This puzzled Ma Zicai. He handed the letter to Huang and asked her where the dowry should be sent. Huang firmly refused to accept a dowry. Feeling that Ma Zicai's home was too simple, Huang wanted him to move to Tao's house in the south, almost like marrying him in. However, Ma Zicai did not agree and chose an auspicious day to hold the ceremony of welcoming the bride. After Huang Ying married Ma Zicai, she opened a door in the wall of Ma's house to facilitate her access to the southern courtyard, where she could supervise the servants' work every day. However, Ma Zicai felt ashamed because his wife was wealthier than him. He often instructed Huang Ying to register the properties of the northern and southern courtyards separately to avoid confusion. Whenever Huang Ying found something needed at home, she would go to the southern courtyard to get it. In less than half a year, visible items in Ma's house were mostly from Tao's house. When Ma Zicai saw these things, he immediately sent people to return them to Tao's house and warned the servants not to go to Tao's house to take things. However, within 10 days, items from Tao's house appeared in Ma Zicai's house again. Despite several back and forths, Ma Zicai did not find it troublesome. Huang Ying laughed and mockingly said to Ma Zicai, "Even Chen Zhongzi wasn't as diligent in returning things as you are." Ma Zicai, feeling ashamed, stopped checking, and everything followed Huang Ying's arrangements. Huang Ying then hired craftsmen, prepared materials, and undertook construction. Ma Zicai could not stop it. After a few months, the buildings of both families were connected. From then on, the two families finally merged into one, and the boundaries were no longer distinguishable. Huang Ying followed Ma Zicai's wishes, closed the door, and stopped selling chrysanthemums. However, their living standards surpassed many prestigious families. Ma Zicai felt uneasy and said to Huang Ying, "The purity and virtue I cultivated for 30 years have been burdened by you. Now I'm living in this world, relying on my own wife. I have no trace of the spirit of a real man. People pray to become wealthy, but I only wish to remain poor." Huang Ying said, "I am not a greedy person, but if I can make our family a bit more prosperous, it may prevent future generations from thinking that Tao Yuanming was born destined to be poor and could never achieve success. I just want our ancestors, especially the former magistrate of Pengzi County, not to be mocked by later generations. But for a poor person, it is difficult to become wealthy, while for a wealthy person, it is easy to become poor. The wealth at the head of the bed, you can freely spend, I won't be stingy." However, Ma Zicai said, "Squandering someone else's wealth is also an ugly thing." Huang Ying replied, "You don't want to be rich, and I don't want to be poor. If there is no other way, we might as well live separately. Let those who seek purity maintain their purity, and those who are impure remain impure. Let's not hinder each other in the future." Huang Ying then built a thatched house in the garden, chose a beautiful maid to serve Ma Zicai, and he accepted it. But after a few days, Ma Zicai began to miss Huang Ying. He sent someone to invite her, but she refused to come. Helplessly, he had to go to find Huang Ying himself. He visited her every other night, and it became a routine. Huang Ying teased him, saying, "Eating at the East House and sleeping at the West House, this is what women from the state of Qi do. A person as upright as you shouldn't behave like this." Ma Zicai was left speechless and could only smile awkwardly. So, the two of them continued to live together as they did before. Later, Ma Zicai had to go to Jinling for some business, coinciding with the peak season of chrysanthemum blossoms in autumn. One morning, as he passed by a flower shop, he noticed a variety of excellent chrysanthemums on display. His suspicion arose as he wondered if these flowers were all cultivated by Tao. After a while, the shop owner emerged, and to Ma Zicai's surprise, it turned out to be Tao. Delighted, Ma Zicai shared the joy of their long-awaited reunion and decided to stay at Tao's place. Ma Zicai invited Tao to return to the northern region, but Tao insisted. Jinling is my hometown, and I want to get married here. I've already accumulated some wealth, please take it back to my sister. I will return home at the end of the year. Ma Zicai didn't listen. He pleaded even more earnestly for him to return together, saying, "Now, our family is already quite prosperous. You can simply enjoy the benefits and need not engage in business anymore." Ma Zicai then sat in the shop, instructed the servants to lower the prices, and within a few days, all the flowers were sold. He urged Tao to pack up, rented a boat, and returned to the northern region together. Upon their arrival, they found the house neatly cleaned, with beds and bedding arranged, as if Ying had anticipated her brother's return. Since Tao came back, he unpacked his belongings, supervised the work, and extensively renovated the pavilions and gardens. Every day, he played chess and drank with Ma Zicai, refraining from making new acquaintances. Although Ma Zicai tried to arrange a marriage for him, Tao declined. Ying sent 2 maids to attend to his daily needs, and after 3 years, one of the maids gave birth to a daughter for Tao. Tao was known for his high tolerance for alcohol, and he had never been heavily intoxicated while drinking with Ma Zicai. Ma Zicai had a friend named Zhang, whose alcohol capacity was unmatched. One day, as he passed by Ma's house, Ma Zicai suggested a drinking competition between Zhang and Tao to determine who could drink more. The two friends indulged in revelry and drank until the 4th watch of the night, consuming hundreds of pots of wine each. Zhang ended up completely drunk, falling into a deep sleep among the seats. Tao, intending to return home, stepped outside but accidentally stepped into the chrysanthemum bed. His body fell, and his clothes dropped to the ground. Unexpectedly, as soon as he fell, he transformed into a chrysanthemum. The chrysanthemum stood tall like a person, with over a dozen flowers blooming at the top, each larger than a fist. Witnessing this, Ma Zicai was terrified, hurriedly ran back, and told Ying everything. Alarmed, Ying rushed to the scene, pulled the chrysanthemum from the ground, and exclaimed, "How could you get so drunk?" Ying covered the chrysanthemum with Tao's clothes, instructed Ma Zicai not to look, and urged him to leave. At dawn, Ma Zicai went to check and found Tao lying near the chrysanthemum bed. It was then that Ma Zicai realized that the siblings of the Tao family were chrysanthemum spirits. Consequently, he became even more protective of them. Since Tao's true form was revealed due to drunkenness, his drinking habits became more unrestrained. Tao often personally invited Zhang with formal invitations, and the two became close friends. One day, coinciding with the flower festival, Zhang visited Tao again, bringing two servants carrying wine soaked in medicinal herbs. They agreed to finish the wine in the jar. However, when the jar was nearly empty, the two men were still not drunk enough. Ma Zicai secretly brought another jar of wine, and they drank it all. Zhang became exhausted from drunkenness, and his servants carried him back home. Tao lay on the ground, once again transforming into a chrysanthemum. Ma Zicai, having grown accustomed to this, followed Huang Ying's method, pulling the chrysanthemum out and observing the changes. However, over time, Ma Zicai noticed the chrysanthemum's leaves turning yellow. Fearful, he quickly informed Huang Ying. Upon hearing this, Huang Ying was horrified and said to Ma Zicai, "You killed my brother, didn't you?" She hurriedly ran over and saw that the roots of the chrysanthemum had withered. Overwhelmed with grief, Huang Ying plucked the chrysanthemum stem, buried it in a flower pot, and brought it inside her house, watering it daily. Ma Zicai, filled with regret, blamed Zhang. Unexpectedly, after a few days, he learned that Zhang had died from excessive drinking. Sometime later, the red chrysanthemum in Huang Ying's house gradually sprouted, and in September, it bloomed. The flowers had short stems, were pink in color, and emitted a fragrance resembling wine. Ma Zicai named it Drunken Tao. Sometimes, Ma Zicai would use wine to nourish it, and it grew even more luxuriantly. Later, Tao's daughter grew up and married into a noble family. Huang Ying lived until old age without any abnormalities. In the conclusion of the story, the author added a commentary. He mentioned that carefree individuals like Tao, even if they were to die due to intoxication, people would lament for them, but they might have found joy in it. As for chrysanthemum spirits like Tao and his sister, if they could be cultivated in the courtyard, it would be like finding good friends or one's beloved. If such chrysanthemums truly existed, they would be worth seeking. Alright. That's all for today's ghostly tale. Huang Ying. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Please also encourage everyone to comment and share more. We'll see you in the next episode.